Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of the Women's Eye Podcast. I'm your guest host, Laura Munson. A little bit about the Women's Eye in terms of how they've been supportive of me first, and then I'll introduce you to our wonderful guest today, Laura Carney. The Women's Eye has been a wonderful support of my work for my memoir, This Is Not the Story You Think It Is, and to my novel, Willis Grove, and to my acclaimed Haven writing retreat in Montana. I love that they included me in their wonderful anthology, 20 Women Storytellers. There it is. I think I'm somewhere. I'm right there, down there.
Aw.
And I'm thrilled that they have asked me to be a guest host on their wonderful All Things Women podcast. Their mission is so important. I love how they celebrate fascinating women who are taking charge, making a difference, and helping them create the life they really want, not the supposed to, but what they really want. My guest today is Laura Carney, and she is doing that and a whole lot more. I'm going to read her bio and a little bit about her book, and then we're going to get into some questions. So here we go. Laura Carney is a writer and a magazine copy editor in New York. She has been published by the Washington Post, the Associated Press, The Hill, Runner's World, Good Housekeeping, The Fix, Upworthy, Maria Shriver's The Sunday Paper, and other places. She has worked as a copy editor in national magazines, primarily women's, for 20 years, including Vanity Fair, GQ, People, and Good Housekeeping. Her first book, My Father's List, just came out this June from Post Hill Press. Laura, do you have a copy someplace next to you? If not, that's okay.
There's one right behind me.
Oh, there it
on
is.
that bookshelf.
Trusty. Oh, there it is. My Father's List. Beautiful.
Should I pull it up?
It's okay.
Get
It's
it.
okay.
Okay.
It's okay. But see, this is why we love Laura, because she's humble. So many people are just like, and here's my book, and here's my book, and here's my book. Which
My husband, I can hear my husband moving. He's probably bringing it.
We love Laura Carney. She's the real deal. Wait till you hear her brilliant. Okay. So we're glad to have her here at the Women's Eye because she is still in the season of book promotion. So she is a well-oiled machine when it comes to answering questions. She's been a part of my online writing community, Haven Nest, as an expert, and I love interviewing her. You are in for a real treat. So here's what her book is about. My Father's List is the title, subtitle, How Living My Dad's Dreams Set Me Free. On the cusp of middle age, a newlywed journalist discovers and finishes the bucket list of her late free-spirited father. 54 adventures in 6 years. That's what 38-year-old journalist Laura Carney embarked on when she discovered her late father, Mick's bucket list. Killed in a car crash when Laura was 25, Mick seemed lost forever. My Father's List is the story of how one woman, with the help of family, friends, and even strangers, found the courage to go after her own dreams after realizing those of a beloved yet mysterious man. This is a story about secrets and the freedom we feel when we learn to trust again in life, in love, and in a father's lessons on how to fully live. Beautiful. So, Laura, welcome. I'm so happy you're here. Thanks for being
I'm
here.
so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And thank you to the Women's Eye. So let's just begin here. I know that there are a lot of people in this community, followers of the Women's Eye, who might want to write books or who are already writing books or have people in their lives saying, you really have, you've got a strong voice, maybe a personal essay, but something in that memoir world. So what inspired you to write this book, which while it really profiles your father, it's really your story. What inspired you to write it?
I think like most stories that want to be told, it's almost like you're just permitting yourself to write it, right? Like you're allowing it. That's what it always felt like to me. Like this thing wanted to come out of me for over a decade. And I like the circumstances just had to be exactly right in order for it to happen. And that includes my readiness as a writer. A lot of things that ended up in the book were personal essays that I had written over the years after my father's death. And I didn't always know why I was writing the essay. It just became something that was a coping technique. And then I would just kind of file it away in a journal and not show anybody. And I'm happy this style of writing for me started that way. because it was never as a performance. I was never writing for readers necessarily. Of course, any writer wants readers to get something out of it and enjoy it, and you'd be lying if you said that you didn't feel that way. But for me, I was almost like, I think what was happening there was I was getting in touch with my inner voice when I was writing the essays, because it was always when I was in some kind of conundrum that my dad normally would have helped me with. And as a young woman in my 20s, I really was missing that. So I think in seeking his guidance after he was dead, and trying to heal things that I couldn't heal with him face to face, I became a creative writer instead. And I was already a journalist. I had already taken classes in how to write articles. So a lot of my writing does come from that. But, I really think, yeah, I think it just took the right timing and maybe the 10,000 hours thing that Malcolm Gladwell talks about. And also, I think I was emotionally desperate by the time my dad's bucket list showed up in my life. I was feeling like I had been trying to play small or take a safe role for so long, because what mattered to me the most was fitting in. And I think a lot of women can probably relate to that, because I think from a young age, we're sort of taught like security is what you need. And I think, our mothers do that, and sometimes our fathers too. Like, they just want us to be okay. They want us to be protected. And, writing is not a very secure path. Having the audacity to use your voice and go on some of these adventures I ended up going on, and then writing about those adventures, there's really nothing secure about that. It was really me going after my heart's desire and finding full expression of myself. And in that way, I was able to find out who I really am. And I needed to do that, because what I started to realize was the only way I was going to finally exercise this resentment and anger and fear and trauma and whatever else I was still carrying since my dad's death. The only way I was going to get there was if I could get authentic first.
Yes, thank you for that beautiful layered answer, because so many people.
That's what I do.
I can relate. So here's the thing: so many people out there, anybody who's listening to this right now, have a really hard time giving themselves permission to write past the fear of exposure and to star as the main character in order to process something that's going on in their own life. And I really believe that writing should be up there with diet and exercise in the realm of preventative wellness. So now that the book's been out, and now that you've been doing all sorts of promotion, I've been following you on social media, you're all over the place, and congratulations, you must be a little exhausted, but way to be a shepherd for your book and its message. Well, I know that's what it takes. The book is the messenger and you're its messenger. So my question to you is, now that you see the value of it from readers, I'm sure you're getting fan mail. I'm sure you've done tons of Q&As in bookstores and conferences. What are the main takeaways that you're hearing from people from this book that you could share with us right now?
People told me that this would happen. My writers group told me this would happen, and I didn't really fully believe it when I was in the early stages of the writing, and I was truly scared to death. Just scared of the scrutiny I would face, probably as a woman, because that just happens to women in the public eye. And almost, afraid to share what I believe to be my true voice, which is my writing voice, with people who knew me. So not just with strangers, not just people saying, is it good enough, but rather people who already had patterns of relating to me. And what if this person I was now becoming, because I really was changing a lot and growing while doing the list. I always go like this when I talk about that, because I think of it as a timeline, I guess. But it was a process, and that growth is reflected in the story that I told. So I think I was just very afraid at many points, because I just would focus on what am I potentially going to lose if I do this. And I was gradually losing pieces of my identity throughout doing the list project anyway, and it would always feel like at first a terrible, devastating loss, like whether it was my full-time job, or the ability to walk at one point because I got injured from a list item. eventually I would come to realize, oh, that thing that felt like a devastating loss actually was a gift, because now I have more room. Now I have more space to be the new thing that I'm supposed to be. Like, I had to get rid of that thing because it was really preventing me from that. So I had gone through that enough times to feel like the risk of putting my voice out there and putting that book out there into the world, whatever losses might come from that, would probably be making room for something I was supposed to be becoming. And I have found that to be true. I do these book talks, and I think they're really important. I read the other day, and I never knew this before, and I think it's really fascinating. The writer David Sedaris, he does talks, and he does them before he publishes his book. So he's getting feedback from people in an audience of things he's just written that haven't even been published yet, like a comedian or something. And I think that interaction and that engagement is so important. So I'll have many talks where people come up to me afterward and they'll say things like, I'm so happy you were so transparent about your depression, because I was just in a hospital. Or I'm so happy that you wrote so honestly about the panic attack you had right before you drove that Corvette, because my father died similarly, and there's a hospital that I'm afraid of, like really specific things like that. And they're crying when they say it to me. And it's like, I get to feel their relief and recognize that my words helped provide that. And my courage to be vulnerable gave them permission to be vulnerable. And usually they'll be telling me things that afterward they'll say, I've never told anybody about this. Why? Like, they're baffled by it. Why are they telling me? You're shaking your heads. I'm sure you've gone through that so many times.
Well, I talked to a lot of memoir writers, and I never meant to be one, but I am one. And then what you were talking about in terms of Sedaris, when my memoir came out, This Is Not the Story You Think It Is, I already knew what its value was because the short version came out in the New York Times, Modern Love column. So I knew so much about the love, the hate, the everything, and so it really helped me be able to kind of steer my conversations when I went out on the road. But, the number one thing I hear, and the reason why I was really nodding my head from people who write memoir, is that the number one fan letter they get, or the thing that somebody comes up with their eyes, windows to the soul with gratitude, say is, thank you for helping me know I'm not alone. And that's what I just heard you say. Yeah, I was just in a hospital recently. I also had a panic attack. That's the permission. If you're out there and wanting to write a memoir, which is very different than the exposure of making stuff up in fiction, although it's still of us, I believe. But memoir is a special creature because you really are putting yourself out there. And when you're reading a memoir, when the writer's afraid to totally go there, you might not know it in your head, but you can feel it in your heart. But Laura really goes there in her book, and you've explained a lot about how to give yourself permission to do that. And so I hope that helps people out there. So now let's get into some nitty gritty here about the actual bucket list. Did you have a favorite one? And it doesn't necessarily mean that it was fun, but like the one that, you'll nenever let go of, like it's just engraved in your heart. Do you have one like that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple for multiple reasons, but I guess I would say there's some that were just like life-changing ones. Like go skydiving at least once. That's life-changing because I survived it, and I recognized the peace that I felt when I was able to let go to that level. That was really important for my development. And go to Vienna just because it was super fun, and it helped me to get back in touch with this part of myself that I thought I had lost, or it didn't even know I felt that way about it. Like this part of me that in college would just go to art museums and spend all day drawing, because I was an art major for a while, and just explore campus, not knowing what I was going to discover next. And I think it's that very unique 20-year-old's feeling, right? Of, I don't know what's coming next in my life. And I did go to Vienna near the end of the list. So I think I was also starting to feel that, like what comes after the list. So that was really important. And I think, there's two that he had that were very much about growth and well-being. And one of those was help Laura win a scholarship, because I always like to say that this was the school of dad. And without my believing that that severance that I got from losing my job was actually just meant to be a benefit for me to move on to the next phase of my life. I think it would have been more challenging for me to actually commit to changing my whole lifestyle to be a writer. And also make my spouse feel happy, healthy, attractive, and young every day of their life. That's a favorite for me too, because I often feel like before I read that, I didn't think of my relationship as a thing where I was setting intentions for my spouse. I was probably approaching it from a more reactive way, or a more like it just is kind of way. But to recognize, oh, my dad actually was intentional about, I mean, it doesn't really matter that they did end up getting divorced in the end, but to that was, and that made it a surprise too, right? Because I always viewed him as kind of like into self-actualizing and not so much into commitment. So to see that at a young age, at 29, he actually was intentional about that. That was surprising to me. And it's something I felt like, well, I want to try to replicate that. And that comes up in the book. I wrote about it briefly, but I think really, since the whole book is a bit of a love story, it's an important one.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of, I heard that on NPR one time. I forget who was being interviewed. It's like, what's your advice on marriage? And the person said, just wake up and be the very best married person you can be every day. And you know how somebody just spins it to you in a new way, and you think, ah, that's what, when you were just sharing that with me, that I'll take that away. So thank you for that. And thank you for Mick too, your dad. That's a great one.
Yes.
Give
Yeah.
it to us again. Do something.
I have to change the words to make it gender neutral, but what it's actually said was make my wife feel happy, healthy, pretty, and young every day of her life.
That's really beautiful. How about
It's romantic, right?
it is romantic, and it sounds like it was surprising for you too. And now you might have just kind of covered some of this, but I'm sure that there was a lot of overlap between what was fun and exciting and inspiring for you and what was also really challenging and scary, the skydiving thing. But what was really the most challenging thing that you did?
Write and have a few novels published. It goes without saying, I guess, because I was just so afraid. I was so afraid of, do I have a right to have a voice about the choices I'm making in my life, and how I talk about those, and what I think of them, so that one by far. But I would say I was pretty scared of surfing. That was a little scary, just because I wiped out so many times. And I had this inclination that it was for men, which is crazy because there's so many incredible female surfers. And I think a lot of the ones that I found scary were things I thought men were supposed to do. And it was always really eye-opening as I would learn about all of the incredible badass women who had been great at those things and even like set records in them.
Yeah. Well, I just still can't. I mean, I would have loved to have met you on the road. I didn't know you then, but that's a question. Did you have some friends and family and loved ones that accompanied you on this journey?
Yeah, always. And that was very surprising to me, because when I set out to do this, I think sometimes people make assumptions when they hear father. They think they know what a father is, and that, oh, well, clearly she just loved him so much and that's why she's doing this. And really it was so much more complex than that. It was that I had unfinished business with him in addition to wanting to honor him. And I felt the choice to do so much to honor him was a radical choice, because I grew up sometimes questioning whether, his choices were honoring me, or honoring, my mom. And she was the practical one who was keeping us alive. Essentially, my dad was the fun one and saw us twice a week, which happens a lot with divorce. And I had some resentment about that. So, to go forward and do it anyway, to me at the beginning felt like, oh, I'm choosing a selfish person's choices, and I'm afraid of that. I don't want to also be selfish. But what happened instead was people just came out of the woodwork, like my best friend, or then a cousin, and then another cousin, and then my husband's best friend. And they just started showing up and saying, how can I help? What can I do? And there was always somebody who had a skill. And I tear up every time I talk about this, because we're living in a time right now where I think people are very cynical about the kindness of others and the goodness, and people who do things just for the sake of being good. And I got to be the very lucky recipient of that. I mean, obviously from my husband, a great deal, but also from friends and family and people who are complete strangers, and they just were invested in this, and they ended up becoming like family to me. And I think that my dad, I think that his spirit is very happy that I went on that adventure, because I needed it. I needed to learn how to open my heart and trust again.
Yes, because they're the people who think about doing something, and then they're the people who do it. And if you're one of those people, and you are, that doesn't mean, again, that you have to do it alone. And it's like, if you ask for help, people will show up. Maybe not the people you thought would show up, but they will. And like you said, even strangers. And I always tell people, if you're trying to figure out how to write a book or an essay, but let's translate this over to how to live your life. You might want, if you feel directionless, you might want to ask yourself, what is the central conflict that I would like to resolve? What is a question that I need resolution for? I need an answer for on some level. And I think that's part of why this book isn't just, here's my list that I did. I did this for a central driving reason. It wasn't just all fun. It was, I've got unfinished business, like you just said. And so for everybody out there, if you want to live your life intentionally, maybe start there. What unfinished business would you like to resolve? What questions would you like to answer? And then instead of skipping quickly to the answer in tips, tricks, and bullet points, forget that stuff. That hardly ever really lands ultimately. Sometimes it can. But in Laura's case, she lived it, she models it, and she gives us permission to do the same by telling her story and going deeply into the conflict and finding the heart there. And that takes bravery, and you don't have to do it alone. We're just going to close up here. But I have one more question. You've really had me think a lot about a bucket list. And, I try to do stuff that's solo. Now that I've said you don't have to do it alone, because I'm often leading groups, I need some time to be the student. And so every winter, in the middle of the dormancy and sometimes harshness of a Montana winter, I go someplace by myself. And there's a poem I love by Emma Mellon, and there's a line that says, "Allow yourself to be spelled differently." And she's talking about travel. Allow yourself to be spelled differently. So I guess my question to you is, because I think that you're a real pro on allowing yourself to be spelled differently by doing this bucket list and all that you learned from it. Talk to us about how important it is for us to have a bucket list.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that, the first thing that entered my mind was a quote I read yesterday from Bob Dylan, and it was similar to that. It was that if you want to do anything creatively well, you have to have room for inspiration, you have to have room for observation, and you have to have room for experiences. And when I read that quote, I felt like, yes, like, because that's what this was, right? Like, I was not inspiration, imagination. I would imagine how I thought things were going to go. Then I would go out and I would do the thing, and I would observe what it was actually like, because what it was actually like was never quite what I thought, what I had imagined. And then I had these experiences that I could write about. And I think it's really crucial that I did this at the age that I did it. And I think we're living in a time that's unique to women that age, because a lot of us are coming out of it, well, all of us are coming out of a pandemic, but a lot of us are coming out of that time kind of questioning some choices that we made before, because things got really topsy-turvy for a little while there. And I think if you come out of that deciding, I want to be really intentional with my life now, and I want to own my choices, and I want to actually write them down, I highly recommend that you do, because as soon as I did that, my life changed completely. I mean, I actually wrote a list of things I valued a year before I found my dad's bucket list. And I still think that that sent me on the path to be ready to receive his dreams when they came, because now I was a person who cared about that, and you talked about my book being about connection. people look at bucket lists, I think, as like I did when I started on my dad's, right? Like they look at it as a selfish pursuit, but it doesn't have to be that way. Because when you become someone, I always love this quote from Joseph Campbell, a vital person vitalizes. When you become someone who's truly present, who's really mindful and in your skin, and being the best you can be as far as being a good person and giving of yourself to the utmost, and having experiencing bliss while doing it, that kind of a person is going to attract other people like that, and it will become an experience of connection, not just one of sheer determination. And that's when people really feel alive, I think.
Wow, I believe in what you just said with my whole heart. That level of intentional living attracts more intentional living. And the people that, I mean, that you and I met each other that way, and we've never met in real life, but we consider each other friends. This is, you put yourself out in a certain way, and I believe that it attracts your true kindreds. And I know there are a lot of kindreds out there listening to this today. So find your tribe. Now, we're going to have to wrap up, sadly, but Laura, thank you so much for being here today. How do we find you online? What is your website?
My website is bylauracarney.com.
And that's BYLAURACARNEY.com.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for this today. You can learn more about Laura and her beautiful book, My Father's List, by also going to thewomenseye.com. And there you'll also find the Women's Eye books, the 20 Women Changemakers and 20 Women Storytellers at the Women's Storytellers book.com. And you can also shop wherever you buy books and at changemakersbook.com. And of course, to see what else Laura is up to, go over to her website, which we just said, www.bylauracarney.com. She's all over the place right now on social media. Follow her. She always provides beautiful content. It's not just a bunch of fluff. It's real and deep, just like she is, as you can tell from this interview today. Thanks again, Laura. And to all of you who are here tuning in to the Woman's Eye podcast, be sure to rate, review, subscribe. I'm Laura Munson, and remember, it's the world as we see it.